I never thought betrayal could happen inside your own home without you noticing it at first. It didn't start with shouting or arguments. It started with silence, a strange kind of silence that slowly filled our house after my grandfather passed away. He was the only person in the family who made me feel seen, like I mattered beyond expectations and obligations. When he was alive, he always told me one day everything I worked for will be yours. Just promise me you'll protect it. I promised him. I just didn't realize I would need protection from my own family. At first, everything seemed normal. My parents handled the funeral arrangements, the paperwork, and the legal discussions. I trusted them completely because that's what children are supposed to do. When they told me, "Don't worry about the inheritance matters, we'll take care of everything," I didn't question it. I thought they were just trying to spare me stress during a painful time, but slowly, small things began to feel wrong. Important documents that were once neatly kept in the wooden cabinet started disappearing. I remember clearly because I checked that cabinet often. My grandfather had kept all his property papers there, always organized, always safe. But now, whenever I opened it, something felt off. A file would be missing one day, then another folder would be shifted, and then suddenly the entire arrangement looked like someone had deliberately searched through it. When I asked my mother about it, she smiled too quickly. "Oh, those old papers. We're just organizing them. You don't need to worry about such things." Her tone was soft, but something inside it felt rehearsed. My father was worse. He avoided my questions completely. Whenever I brought up the inheritance, he would change the topic or leave the room. At first, I thought he was just grieving in his own way. But grief doesn't usually make people hide things from their own children. It was the first crack in my trust. The second crack came with money. I noticed that conversations between my parents became unusually quiet whenever I entered the room. If I walked in suddenly, they would stop talking mid-sentence. My father would immediately pick up his phone, pretending he had been busy, while my mother would start cleaning something that didn't need cleaning. It made me uneasy, but I still didn't want to assume the worst. Then came the phone call. It was late evening. I was passing by the living room when I heard my father's voice. He was speaking low, almost whispering. "Yes, the transfer is done," he said. "Just finalize everything properly and make sure no one finds out too early." I stopped walking. My heartbeat didn't just speed up, it dropped. Transfer? What transfer? I stepped closer to the door, trying to hear more, but the moment he sensed my presence, he ended the call abruptly. When I walked in, he looked up and smiled casually, like nothing had happened. "Who are you talking to?" I asked. "Work," he replied instantly, "nothing important," but his eyes didn't meet mine. That was the moment something inside me shifted. Not fully broken yet, but no longer whole. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying his words in my head. "The transfer is done." It didn't sound like work. It sounded like something final, something secret. Something I was not supposed to know about. I told myself I was overthinking. I wanted to believe that. Because believing the opposite meant accepting something I wasn't ready for. That my own parents might be hiding something from me. A few days later, I decided to visit the local land registry office. I told myself it was just curiosity, just to clear my doubts. I gave them my grandfather's property details and waited patiently while the clerk typed into the system. My hands were cold. I kept telling myself there was nothing to worry about. The clerk frowned slightly as he looked at the screen. "This property was sold last month," he said. I blinked. For a moment I thought I misheard him. "Sold," I repeated slowly. "Yes," he confirmed. "Ownership has been transferred." I laughed nervously, shaking my head. "That's impossible. There must be a mistake." He turned the screen slightly toward me. The records were clear, dates, signatures, stamps, everything looked official, but nothing felt real. Because I knew one thing for sure. I never signed anything. My grandfather never signed anything after his death either. Which meant only one thing: someone else did. Someone from my own family. I walked out of that office in silence. The sun was bright outside. People were talking. Cars were moving. But I felt like I wasn't part of that world anymore. My inheritance wasn't just property, It was a promise, a memory, a connection to the only person who ever truly believed in me. And now it had been taken without my knowledge, without my consent, by the people I trusted most. That night, when I returned home, everything looked normal again. My mother was cooking. My father was watching television. They smiled at me like nothing had changed, but everything had, and for the first time in my life, I began to wonder how long had the silent theft already been happening before I even noticed. After that visit to the land registry office, I didn't feel like myself anymore. It wasn't just shock. It was something deeper, like my mind had started refusing to accept what my eyes had already seen. I kept replaying the clerk's words over and over again. Sold last month. It sounded too clean for something so cruel. That night, I sat in my room staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself there had to be a mistake. Records can be wrong, systems can glitch. Maybe someone had confused my grandfather's property with another file. But even as I tried to build excuses, my instincts were tearing them down, because deep down, I already knew the truth wasn't going to be simple. The next morning, I decided to test my parents. I didn't confront them directly, not yet. I wanted to watch them first. At breakfast, I casually said I was thinking about grandfather's land. The reaction was immediate but subtle. My mother paused mid-motion, her spoon hovering slightly before she forced a smile. "Why are you thinking about that again? It's all been handled." My father didn't even look up from his plate. "You should focus on your studies instead." Handled, that word again, too final, too rehearsed. I nodded slowly, pretending to accept it, but inside something was tightening. That afternoon, I did something I had never done before. I went to meet one of my grandfather's old contacts, a retired clerk who used to help him with property documentation. He lived in a small house near the outskirts of town. When I arrived, he recognized me instantly. "You look just like him," he said softly. Hearing my grandfather's name made something twist inside my chest. I told him I needed help understanding something. I didn't give him details at first, just the property name. The moment I said it, his expression changed. "That land," he muttered slowly. "There were strict conditions attached to it." My heart jumped. "What conditions?" I asked. He stood up and walked to a dusty cabinet, pulling out an old file register. His hands trembled slightly as he flipped through pages. Then he stopped. "There it is," he said quietly. He turned the page toward me, and I saw it. My grandfather's signature. Clear, official, strong, and below it, a clause I had never seen before. "No sale, transfer, or lease shall be valid without direct consent and biometric verification of the designated heir." My breath caught in my throat. "That means," I whispered. He looked at me seriously. "It means no one can legally sell it without you." Silence filled the room. My thoughts suddenly turned chaotic. If that was true, then what did the registry office just show me? How did a sale even happen? I asked him that exact question. He hesitated. "That means," he said carefully, "someone bypassed the system." My stomach dropped. Bypassed, not a mistake, not confusion, a deliberate action. Someone had gone around the rules. I thanked him and left quickly, my mind spinning faster with every step. The air outside felt heavier than before, like even reality had changed its tone. When I got home, my parents were acting strangely calm. Too calm. My mother was folding clothes with precision, humming softly like nothing in the world was wrong. My father was sitting in the living room reading the newspaper, occasionally sipping tea like a normal day was unfolding. But I wasn't fooled anymore. I walked straight into the room and placed a question in front of them. "Did you sell grandfather's land?" The room froze. For a split second, neither of them spoke. It was the kind of silence that says more than words ever could. Then my father sighed, as if I was the problem for asking. "You don't understand how things work," he said. My mother quickly stepped in. "We did what was necessary." Necessary, I laughed once, but there was no humor in it. "Necessary for who?" I asked. "Because the registry office says it was sold, and I never signed anything." My father finally looked at me properly now. His expression wasn't guilty. It was controlled. "You're too emotional about this," he said. "We handled everything legally." That was the moment I realized something terrifying. They weren't denying it. They were justifying it. My chest tightened. Legally, there were conditions. Grandfather left restrictions. You couldn't sell it without me. My mother's voice sharpened slightly. We had no choice. Things were complicated. Complicated. Another word meant to hide truth inside confusion. I stepped back slowly, looking at both of them like I was seeing strangers. So you knew, I said quietly. You knew it wasn't allowed, but you did it anyway. No answer, just silence again. That silence confirmed everything. I turned away before my emotions could break through. I didn't want them to see me fall apart, not yet. Because something inside me was shifting. Pain was still there, but now something else was forming underneath it. Clarity. If they had truly done what I suspected, then this wasn't just betrayal, it was intentional. And intentional things leave evidence. That night, I didn't sleep. I went through every memory, every conversation, every missing document. I realized the theft hadn't been sudden. It had been planned, step by step, quietly, carefully, and the worst part? I had trusted every step of it, but now I understood something important. If they thought I would accept this silently, then they had no idea what I was about to find next. After that confrontation, the house stopped feeling like a home. It felt like a place where truth and lies were living under the same roof, pretending not to know each other. No one brought up the inheritance again. My parents acted as if the conversation had never happened. My mother still cooked my meals. My father still asked me ordinary questions like "Did you eat?" or "How was your day?" But every word now felt like it was floating on top of something much darker. And me, I stopped reacting, not because I had accepted it, but because I had started listening instead of speaking. Because silence, I realized, is where people reveal what they are trying to hide. That night, I couldn't stay inside the house. I walked without direction until I found myself near the old part of town, where my grandfather used to keep his belongings. A storage room he never let anyone else touch. He always said some things are safer when they are left untouched by curiosity. At the time, I thought he was just being sentimental. Now I wondered if he had been preparing for something I never understood. The building was still there, half forgotten, with rusted locks and faded paint. My hands trembled slightly as I forced the door open. It creaked loudly, like it hadn't been disturbed in years. Dust filled the air the moment I stepped inside. Everything inside looked frozen in time. Old furniture covered in white sheets, boxes stacked carefully, and the smell of paper and wood that carried memories I wasn't ready to face. I moved slowly, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. Then I saw it, a small wooden box placed on a high shelf. Different from everything else, cleaner, deliberately preserved. My heart started beating faster. I climbed up and pulled it down carefully. It was heavier than I expected. There was no lock, just an envelope inside. My name was written on it in my grandfather's handwriting. For a moment, I just stared at it. My fingers didn't move. Something inside me was afraid not of what I might find, but of what it might confirm. Finally, I opened it. Inside was a single legal document, but it wasn't just any document. It was the original inheritance deed. And as my eyes moved across the page, I felt my entire body go still. There it was. A clause I had never seen before, written clearly in legal language. Any attempt to sell, transfer, or alter ownership without the direct biometric consent of the named heir shall render the transaction null and void. My breath stopped. I read it again and again. It wasn't unclear. It wasn't hidden. It was intentional, written to protect me specifically. But that wasn't all. Attached beneath it was a second verification sheet. A seal of authentication from a legal authority confirming that this condition was not just symbolic, it was enforceable, which meant something impossible had just become very real. If the property had been sold, then the sale itself was invalid. Completely, legally, irrefutably. My hands started shaking as the realization settled in. This wasn't just betrayal anymore. This was something deeper, fraud, and someone had either ignored the law or tried to bypass it deliberately. I sat there in the dust, holding that paper like it was heavier than anything I had ever carried. My grandfather hadn't just left me inheritance. He had left me protection against exactly this kind of betrayal, and suddenly, Everything clicked into place. The missing documents, the rushed explanations, the way my parents avoided details, the calmness in their voices when I asked questions. They weren't confused. They were confident that I wouldn't find this, but I had. I folded the document carefully and placed it back inside the envelope. My mind wasn't spinning anymore. It was settling, because something strange happens when shock turns into clarity. You stop breaking and start planning. When I returned home, the house looked exactly the same. Lights on, television on, normal life pretending to exist. My mother asked, "Where were you?" "Walking," I said simply. My father didn't look up, but now I was looking at them differently, not as parents, as people who had made a decision. A decision that now had consequences they didn't understand yet. I went to my room and locked the door. I placed the document on my desk and stared at it for a long time. This was the truth they didn't want me to find. The final paper, the one thing that turned confusion into evidence, and now I wasn't just the person who had been betrayed. I was the person who could prove it. Outside my room, I could hear life continuing as if nothing had changed. But inside me, something had, because now I knew this wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of theirs ending. The morning after I found the final document, everything felt different. Not louder, not dramatic, just clear. It was strange how truth didn't come with noise, it came with stillness. The kind of stillness that makes you realize you've been standing in the middle of a storm without noticing the wind. I didn't confront my parents immediately. That was their expectation, that I would explode, argue, beg, or emotionally collapse. That was the version of me they were prepared to handle, but they didn't know I had stopped being that version. Instead, I went straight to the lawyer my grandfather had once trusted. I carried the envelope with me like it was something alive. When I placed it on his desk, he didn't speak at first. He just read, line by line. His expression slowly changed from curiosity to disbelief, and then to seriousness. "This," he said finally, tapping the document, "invalidates everything." I nodded quietly. "They sold it," I said. Without my consent, he leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. "Then this wasn't just unethical, it's legally actionable fraud." That word hit differently. Fraud. It made everything real in a way emotions never could. The lawyer stood up immediately and began making calls. Files were opened, records were pulled, verification systems were checked again, and within hours the truth that my parents had carefully buried started rising to the surface. The sale was not just questionable, it was invalid from the start. The biometric requirement had been bypassed. The authorization was incomplete. The legal conditions set by my grandfather had been ignored entirely. Every signature they used to justify the transfer now meant nothing. It was like watching a carefully built illusion collapse piece by piece. By the time I left the office, official notices had already been prepared. The property transfer was frozen. The buyer was contacted, and the transaction began to unravel, quietly, legally, irrevocably. No shouting was needed. No public confrontation. Just paperwork moving through systems that don't care about emotions, only truth. When I got home that evening, the atmosphere felt heavier than usual. My mother was sitting still, not cooking, not moving. My father was pacing slightly, something I had never seen before. Their confidence, the one they carried so easily before, was gone. They had sensed it. Something was wrong, and this time they were right. My father looked at me the moment I entered. "Did you do something?" he asked sharply. I didn't answer immediately. I placed my bag down slowly and looked at both of them. "I didn't do anything," I said calmly. "I corrected something you broke." My mother stood up quickly. "What are you talking about?" I walked to the table and placed a copy of the legal notice in front of them. The moment my father saw it, his face changed, not anger, not denial, fear. "For the first time, this is not possible," he said immediately. "We followed procedure." I shook my head. "You followed what you wanted to believe was procedure, not what the law actually requires." Silence filled the room again, but this time it wasn't powerful. It was empty. My mother's voice softened, almost desperate now. "We did it for stability, for the family." I looked at her for a long moment. No, I said quietly. You did it for control. That sentence landed harder than anything I had said before. My father tried to speak again, but nothing came out clearly. The confidence he once had was gone, replaced with something unfamiliar realization. For the first time, they understood they were no longer in control of the situation. I was, but I didn't feel powerful. I felt calm, because revenge doesn't always feel like fire. Sometimes it feels like balance returning after years of imbalance. Days passed quickly after that. Legal confirmations arrived, the buyer withdrew, the property returned to my name officially. Every attempt to justify the sale collapsed under documentation that could not be argued with, and my parents. They were called in for questioning, not by me, by the system they thought they could bypass. One evening, my mother approached me quietly. We didn't think it would go this far, she said softly. I looked at her, not with anger anymore, but with distance. That's the problem, I replied. You never thought about how far it could go, only how far you could take it. She didn't respond. Because there was nothing left to defend, a few days later I went back to my grandfather's land. The wind moved through the trees exactly the way I remembered. Everything looked the same, but I wasn't the same person standing there anymore. I had lost something in this journey. Trust, but I had gained something stronger, truth, and something even rarer, closure. I stood there for a long time, letting the silence wrap around me. Not painful this time, peaceful, because in the end I didn't destroy anyone. I just uncovered what they had already done. And sometimes, the sweetest revenge is not what you take from others, but what you take back for yourself.